Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming to today's session on the importance of essential and technical skills in Canada's bioeconomy. My name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the President and CEO of BioTalent Canada and the moderator of today's panel discussion. I'm going to briefly introduce you to the people on the dais for today, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can participate in answering our distinguished panelists some questions. So they'll go into themselves a little bit later, and I'll do that. But first, I'd just like to refer to Helen Sheridan, Edward Short, and Dr. Judene Pretti. Helen Sheridan is the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at STEMCELL Technologies, and we thank her because it's extremely early out there on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today, Helen. Ed Short leads Human Resources for Charles River Laboratories Safety Assessment Business, and Judene Pretti is the Director of the Work-Learn Institute at the University of Waterloo. And for those of you who are unaware about what we do at BioTalent Canada, first of all, we're partners with the STEMCELL Network, and I want to thank the STEMCELL Network for providing this platform and welcoming us here today for this important topic during this great conference. So at BioTalent Canada, if you've never heard of us, shame on you. Just kidding. If you haven't heard of us, we're a well-kept secret. Sometimes as I used to travel around the country, a lot of people were surprised that we've been in the background managing and supporting talent across Canada and Canada's bioeconomy. We're essentially an HR partner and labor market specialist for growth of talent and skills in Canada's bioeconomy. We work closely with biotech employers, associations, post-secondary institutions, and even immigrant serving agencies and economic development commissions to connect job-ready talent to the industry. We try to create opportunities and strengthen the skills of those entering and those staying in the bioeconomy workforce. So in terms of strengthening skills, that's really the final point. That's really the point that brings us to today's panel discussion. BioTalent Canada made a pretty significant announcement this morning alongside our partner, the STEMCELL Network, about the launch of highly specialized online technical skills training courses. This is on the heels of a similar announcement 2 weeks ago about our new essential skills training courses. These courses were developed in concert with post-secondary institutions and employers, like the ones that are featured today. And what we were trying to do was focus on the skills, the essential and technical skills that were really required, highly valued by employers like STEMCELL Technologies and Charles River Laboratories, but that were often not being taught with as much focus by Canada's colleges and universities. So Canada, as we all know, Canada has the potential to be a bioeconomy world leader. And the aims and objectives of organizations like the HBEST report, the Health and Biosciences Economic Strategy Tables, which were organized by the federal government, was that they wanted to position Canada's bioeconomy as a world leader in that industry in the next 5 years. And a major factor that will determine if we reach that goal will be whether we have access to highly skilled, world-class talent. An organization needs employees, as you know, with razor-sharp essential skills and technical skills to complement those basics. Many programs that have been instituted in the last couple of years have focused on work-integrated learning. We have one such program. We call it the Student Work Placement Program, or SWIP. It helps connect biotech employers to young talent, but there's only so much one can learn, obviously, in a classroom. So you can imagine the advantage companies would have with available professional development tools that would ensure new hires and existing employees could onboard more quickly. So the development of some of these specialized training courses that complement our work placement program, which is a wage subsidy program for co-ops and internships, it's sort of a natural evolution. It closes the loop where we facilitate students and new employees to go into the workplace, but then we offer training as well to prepare them. So that's what we're here to talk about today. The labor supply challenges that Canada's bioeconomy faces, and some of the solutions that hopefully we can come out to together. So I'm going to hand the metaphorical mic over to each of our panelists to give a little bit more background on themselves, and then we'll get started in the discussion and some Q&A. So without further ado, Helen Sheridan over in British Columbia, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and STEMCELL Technologies.
Thanks, Rob. Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's delightful to be here as a guest of BioTalent and the STEMCELL Network together. We are key partners. Both organizations have been huge contributors to the development of STEMCELL's success and its growth. I've been with STEMCELL Technologies for 5 years now, and during that period of time, we've grown from about 700 employees to over 1,500 globally. We're now doing business in 15 countries across the world. And obviously, coming along with that is a tremendous amount of hiring and learning and development opportunities for our existing staff. But less obviously, during that journey, we have gone from a research use only product company leaning more and more into GMP products as we see scientific researchers look closely at finding a path to the clinic for their scientific discoveries. We likewise have to respond to that as an organization and provide them with the reagents, tools, and instruments necessary to be able to make that migration to the clinic. And our existing staff have to learn and grow along the way as we do. So this partnership with BioTalent has been fantastic for us, and we have utilized many of their funding programs to bring new talent into the organization, and also partnered with them on the Essential Skills program, as we see it definitely as an accelerant to talent coming into STEMCELL. The one last thing I'll say is I've spent almost 30 years in the field of HR now, and I was lucky enough to start my career in the early 90s as the high-tech sector was booming. I was part of that exponential growth, and I see the same signals in Canada's bioeconomy at the moment, and even further accelerated by recent funding being offered by the federal government for life sciences company across Canada to support the COVID response. It's a very exciting time for this industry in Canada, and a very exciting time for talent who want to grow their careers here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Helen. I appreciate that. And welcome. I hope you have your coffee with you.
I do.
Excellent. And next, I'd like to introduce Judene Pretti from the University of Waterloo. Judene.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you for inviting me to join this conversation. Congratulations to BioTalent for bringing this conversation to a national level. It's certainly in line with the work that we've been doing at the University of Waterloo. So, as you mentioned, I am the director of the Work Learn Institute at the University of Waterloo. I've been in the post-secondary sector for more than 20 years, and my current role is involved in conducting research related to co-op and other forms of work-integrated learning programs. I'm involved with the CWIL Canada, so the National Association for Co-op Education and Work-Integrated Learning, and one of the projects that we've been working on is building a resource hub for those involved in the practice of co-op and work-integrated learning. So this topic is very relevant for us today, in that we are very proud to be a partner of BioTalent Canada, one of our industry association partners, who we see the importance of connecting with to ensure that our programs that we're offering are aligned with what the needs of industry are. We have launched at the University of Waterloo our next strategic plan, which includes as one of its core themes the role of preparing students for a complex future. Within the co-op and experiential portfolio, our overarching goals relate to future-proofing students, our industry partners and community partners, as well as ourselves. So what can we be doing today to help us adapt to the changes ahead for everyone? So for students, we see that as being able to help them articulate and identify the key skills that are going to be relevant in positioning them for this complex world. For industry, helping them better identify, recruit, and retain the candidates that they need for growth. And for ourselves, helping to meet the needs of students and industry partners in adapting our programming to create future-ready grads. So this has been a focus of a great deal of the work that my team has been doing and across the co-op and experiential portfolio. And so I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today.
Thanks, Judene, and welcome. Glad you could join us. And last but not least, I'd like to have Ed Short from Charles River Laboratories. Good morning, Ed. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, Rob. Pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation to be part of this conversation. I've been with the Montreal facility here since 1997. We were about 650 employees when I joined. The site here reached about 1,500 employees, is about that number now over the years. And my role has evolved within the larger Charles River organization to thankfully get to work with my sites across the globe in 7 different countries, 20 or so different facilities. Charles River Labs is a contract research organization, so we do safety assessment and preclinical work for large pharma, for biotech companies, working on vaccines, novel therapeutics to help treat all sorts of diseases and conditions. In the last while, we've seen a real focus on some work on rare diseases with some orphan drugs, looking to help with child pediatric diseases especially, and help get drugs safely into the clinic and into patients who desperately need them more quickly. We've been working over the years to try and take white space out of the drug development continuum to really improve lives and advance the science that is so precious in our industry. I've been working with BioTalent as a partner for probably a little over 5 years, probably a bit more than that, helping to contribute to some of the programs that are in place, some of the technical training pieces that we've seen, the lab skills, and certainly have greatly been able to benefit and leverage the plug-in that they've got across the industry, across the country, as we seek out talent for Charles River, but for the industry more broadly. So delighted to be here, and looking forward to a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ed. And Helen, you alluded to it. It certainly is an exciting time to be in biotechnology. Certainly, even in my own social circles, it's interesting to see what's going on around us and to have the entire population look to our industry to save the world yet again. So very interesting. So let's get into it, shall we? Yes, let's go to our grid now. One of the things that I wanted to tell you, the audience I'm talking about, is that there is a Q&A set panel at the bottom of your screens that you can ask us questions. So you can ask the panel questions. We have some questions to get us started, of course, but we certainly want to be attentive to the needs of our audience. So if there's something that you wanted to ask either one or all of our panelists, please feel free to put it in the Q&A chat. Also, we're going to put you to work a little bit because we have some polls that are going along, not real polls, like actually question polls, that we'll be putting up periodically during the to punctuate some of the questions, because we want to hear what your experience has been with regards to your own career or the company that you work. So we'll put up some polling questions. We'll be able to answer it, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of the results as we go. So let's get started. So I'd like to ask all of the panelists this question. Ed and Helen and Judene, you guys have seen you're in very large institutions, you're large companies in terms of, so you can get a bit of a bird's eye view of the industry. And Helen, you alluded to it now. It's a very exciting time to be here. The growth factors that are expected within the Canadian bioeconomy is that we become a world leader. The Canadian biotech industry becomes a world leader in the next 5 or 6 years. So for that to happen, we would have to double exports. We would have to increase productivity, create organically several companies the size of a company like STEMCELL Technologies. So what do you see as some of the biggest talent roadblocks and challenges from a Canadian standpoint, from an entire industrial standpoint, for us to accomplish that in such a short amount of time? Helen, can we start with you? And if I can ask you that question to launch us off.
Certainly, Rob. Thanks for the question. I think my answer today would be slightly different than if you'd asked me this question 9 months ago, but let me start with my 9 months answer first. We believe that the Canadian education institutions, as well as internationally, are preparing our employees extremely well with respect to scientific rigor and the thinking required to innovate in the ways that our industry needs to be an industry leader in the next 5 years. Where we see some challenges is with the business of science. And a few years ago, we would say that sometimes it takes us up to 2 years to break someone of the academic point of view and help them integrate into the speed required and also the collaboration required in a scientific business. Today, that shifts even more dramatically. And I would say that the ability to be nimble, the ability to do science quickly, we're seeing outside of ourselves in industry papers being written and published without the rigor of peer evaluation that we're used to seeing in the past. And that's no different than what we experience in industry when we're attempting to innovate and race to the competitive edge. So we experience talent coming into the business with the excellent foundations of science. And we also need them to have technology skills so that they can work virtually, but also so they can do advanced analytics very quickly. Sometimes that even might mean that they need coding skills or business intelligence or bioinformatics skills. And secondly, that ability to reach out into our organization or external to our organization to other scientists quickly to stand on the shoulders as we innovate in this new, more urgent innovation environment.
Perfect. Thanks, Helen. I appreciate that. And it is interesting because you mentioned like coding skills, and we're seeing so much more that the world of IT and biotech are more and more overlapping, right? There's so many more. They're going into e-health and artificial intelligence, which is really blurring those lines so much. And I think that's going to be, because that is the way of the future as well in terms of where we're going. Ed, give us your perspective, if you wouldn't mind, from what you've seen.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the same things that Helen mentioned. I would call out, the kind of the lab readiness of that talent, being able to translate kind of that scientific knowledge and rigor into technical execution. Really being able to operationalize it or, put it into a business context, as Helen referred to. The application of some of that at the speed that we're seeing the need for our work can be a challenge. So as we onboard new talent, getting them up to that speed, able to make those studies work, deliver the results to our clients as fast as possible, so that as they can make go, no-go decisions on the next steps of their research and their development. And all of that coupled in our evolving digitalization of our science in our laboratories. So to the coding piece that Helen had mentioned, Charles River has started as of Wednesday of last week, kicking off our digital transformation of our business. So it's very real how we couple those pieces together. How do we interact with our clients, be they biotech and large pharma? How do they get to see their results in real time? How do they advance the science virtually, in a virtual lab environment? And how do we equip our researchers and our employees with the most advanced tools to be able to get the most out of their knowledge, out of their work, and really couple together with our client base to better serve, human lives.
Perfect. Thanks, Ed. So Judene, you're here, and we didn't want to single you out because you're the lone representative of post-secondary academia on the panel. But it's an interesting, because it is that where Ed and Helen sort of represent the demand side, you very much represent the supply side. So from your perspective, where do you see, and from an academic perspective, what do you see the challenge ahead of our colleges and universities in the supply of talent to be able to grow the bioeconomy to a world leader in the next 5 years?
Yeah, thank you. It's really affirming to hear the perspectives of Ed and Helen, because it certainly aligns with work that we've been doing. My team recently put together a paper that looks at the future of work trends, and specifically how programs like work integrated learning can be helping to build those pipelines that are going to be needed. And so it's interesting to me to hear that that's exactly what the reality is, that reskilling and upskilling is going to be a function of these workplaces. They're going to need to incorporate technological agility into all aspects of work, not just those who have been trained in a technical discipline. So certainly consistent with the thinking and the work that we've been doing. And I think, when you consider the investments that the federal government has made in SWIP, the Student Work Placement Program, to ensure that more students do have access to those workplace experiences prior to graduation, I think that's going to go a long way. And not to say that that those students come ready to hit the ground with respect to everything your organization needs, but I think they come to you as eager learners, ready to contribute. And I think that at least with respect to the Waterloo co-op model, because they're in those 4-month work terms, it's a short amount of time for them to demonstrate that they can get up to speed and ready. And I think that's an important feature of the program is that they know they need to learn quickly, and they need to adapt to what the context is that they're in, and be able to deliver for the organization within the time that they're there. I guess one other thing that I would throw out is related to values. And so one of the roadblocks that occurs to me is there was some work done at Waterloo a year or so ago examining the potential gap between the values of the next generation of talent and what organizations believe they are offering. And so there's a bit of a cautionary tale there, in the sense, not in terms of the values of organizations, but more in terms of what employers think the values of the next generation are. And there's a potential mismatch there. And I think in making assumptions about what is going to motivate young talent, if we're wrong on that front, it could lead to retention issues. And then more of an overarching, we just can't get young talent to stay with us, as opposed to realizing that they're maybe not motivated by the things that you think they are.
Really good points there. And you know what, having worked with a bunch of companies, certainly the idea of onboarding millennials, pardon the cliche, because millennials, I mean, I don't think I've seen a generation more beat up than the millennials, and it becomes almost cliche. But many companies, and it's interesting, they've taken that challenge that you mentioned in terms of understanding what skills they want and what kind of a culture they want to go to, and they turned it on its head and turned a challenge into a business opportunity, where some of them have become employers of choice, and they're onboarding millennials and having the millennials mold the culture. And they're finding it's very useful, because millennials do embrace technology, and they have that agility, at least technologically, that you were talking about. And so I find that very interesting to see how they're perceived by some of us who are a little bit further away from being the definition of youth, in terms of being able to examine what they're doing. Anyway, it's interesting to see how some companies are going to be able to turn that on its head. So, Judene, I'd like you to expand upon this, where from the student's point of view. So where the students are concerned, what do they tell you and an organization like the University of Waterloo, which is a world leader in work integrated learning? I mean, your reputation, you were one of the first to the table if not the first, the Canadian first to the table on this kind of portfolio of co-ops, internships, and work integrated learning. What are the students telling you that the skills that they wish that they could improve before they enter the workforce, or as they get into the workforce?
Yeah, it's a good question. So A few things. I would say that the nature of the competitive aspect of the Waterloo Co-op program means that students are exposed to job postings, a centralized job posting board, which means they can see jobs from across different industries. So they're not pigeonholed to you're in this program and therefore these are the specific jobs that you're eligible for. And I think that's a really important aspect of the program, because students get exposed to the types of skills that are needed in other organizations or other industries, and may see an alignment there that we as academics may not have presupposed for them. And so I think that not only do they see what skills industries or specific organizations are looking for, but it gives them an opportunity to shoot for that. So if they see a company they want to work in, or a sector they want to work in, and they see patterns in the things that they're looking for, then that's how they can sort of set their learning goals for what experiences do they want to have, so they or training do they want to participate in to set themselves up for success in those employments. I would say for some it's the technical skills, so they recognize that there are specific tools or topics that aren't covered in their academic programs that they want to teach themselves. We did launch a digital skills bundle in the summer to try to support companies who needed to quickly get online. And so we opened it up to students from all faculties that they could enroll in digital video marketing, web design, sales, and e-commerce. And almost 900 students took us up on that. So registered to do this self-learning of the technical skills. But I also think that for others, they know that it's the human skills. So Helen mentioned earlier the innovation, the leadership, the things they need to think about that are going to distinguish them. The adaptability, and certainly that's an area that we've been focused on. And so we've developed a future-ready talent framework based on research on both competency frameworks and oriented towards what we see as changing with the future of work. And so that's going to give students a framework or a tool that they can think about in planning the experiences and the academic courses that they take, and additional training that they may want to position themselves to be competitive. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. Well, this is good. Leads into our first polling question. So we're going to do that first. And then I got a question from the audience that I'm going to direct toward Helen and Ed in a moment. So the first polling question, so those of you who are in our audience, please, you can select one or more of the responses here. And the first question is, what skills training do you wish you had before launching your career? Now, if those of you who are joining us may be students, you can say, what skills training do you think you will need before you launch your career? So if I'm hoping, I can't see the poll, so I'm hoping it's getting out to our audience. And the four options of those are scientific technical skills. In other words, for example, report writing, good manufacturing practices, very technical scientific skills. B, leadership skills. C, communication and interpersonal skills. Or D, process improvement methodology. So those are the four options that are put forward before our audience. While you respond, we'll talk about results. Hopefully, our hosts will push those results to me so we can talk about them in the next question or two. But first, let's take a question from our audience. And Helen, this was something I think you were talking about earlier. Was what are the main practices or thought processes that you think academics would have to retrain on or rewire within themselves as they enter the industry? What either, is there something that they've been a certain pattern of thought or way of thinking that has to be rerouted to enter business? I mean, we talked a little bit about that. You and I have done that before in prior meetings, but I'd like to have your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Rob. First, I will say that I think all of us have to rewire all the time. Certainly speaking for myself, I'm a constant work in progress, always trying to rewire patterns that are less effective in business. So I don't want to single out academics here by any means. I will say that in my perception anyway, is that particularly when someone has been in education long enough to get a PhD or a postdoc, there are certain ways in which certain institutions, and Waterloo may be an exception to this, encourage the academic environment to work. And so we've seen students who come out of those sorts of programs having been trained to only speak up when they're spoken to respect hierarchy in a room, and not to offer a different point of view if it's different than the PI's. There is also collaboration skills that they come to the table with, but within their lab. And so I've heard many stories of PhDs who worked across the hall from another lab for many years and never spoke to the scientists who were working in the other lab. And in an industry setting, those kinds of skills have to shift, especially when the industry is shifting around us. So as I mentioned, STEMCELL in its journey towards GMP has had to bring in outside talent, particularly at the executive level, to bring those kind of GMP skills into our organization. And because the industry is moving so quickly, we're training staff, for example, in our QC and QA areas on good manufacturing practice. Down the line, though, earlier on in the research process, we have researchers who are working on products that will become products for STEMCELL sometime in the next 5 years. And because we're, because the business is focused on what's, sort of happening in the here and now, we would really, optimally, what would happen is our research and development folks would say, my product down the line is most likely going to need to be produced in a general manufacturing environment. So what are the ways in which my research needs to shift in order that when we move that innovation into process development and then manufacturing, it is producible in a GMP environment? So there's sort of this forward thinking beyond just my science of, what is the context in which my science or my innovation may be commercialized in the future, and what do I need to be thinking about today and the way in which I craft my question, my science, and my research in order to produce that outcome. So what that requires then is some general knowledge of what's going on in the industry and what futurists think is going to happen in our industry. So it's sort of an outside way of thinking where perhaps in an academic environment you get stuck in just working on the immediate question that you're working on. And then, like I said, sort of the networking and the collaboration, because no one's expecting that you're doing all this research on your own. It happens through networking conversations. It happens through events like the one that we're a part of today, where, you have these collision spaces and you're able to, in a normal world, meet up with people in hallways and ask them about their science and then kind of make these connections in your innovation. I think even more so today in a COVID world where many of us are working virtually, that becomes more difficult. And as a result of it, even people who view that as a core skill that they hold have to work harder at finding those collision spaces for the innovation to occur. So kudos to everyone who's participating in this virtual event. And just a shout out for the virtual networking that I know that STEMCELL Network is conducting as part of this conference, because it's those places, I think, that these innovation jumps happen. And just going back to the comment that I made about respecting hierarchy and in the academic environment, I came into life sciences with no life sciences experience 5 years ago. I came into the technology industry with no technology experience. And what made me successful in both industries was my curiosity and my interest in learning from others. And what I will say about that is that, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Too early in the morning for me. What I will say about that is that it's that kind of external outreach that creates innovation. So when I ask a stupid question in an executive meeting in a life sciences company out of my ignorance, it may advance the thinking of other subject matter experts who are in the room, because my diversity that I bring to the table of not being from the industry has me asking stupid questions that industry specialists may no longer ask. And I would say this to the people who are not yet in industry, right? Your lack of experience is a gift to us. We also have to train you. But it's that diversity of not having your channels already wired, not being kind of indoctrinated into the system, that helps companies make these giant leaps forward in innovation. So, I would just sort of give anyone who's starting a new job soon or contemplating a new job permission and encouragement to speak up, to ask those stupid questions, because it might be those questions that bring the next big scientific advancement to the company that you're working for or to the lab that you're working for.
Thanks, Helen. It's interesting. I meet a lot of students like you. Meet a lot of students in my travels, and I find it quite truly ironic. You were talking about these collision events and networking events and things that they have to look into, and especially in the virtual world, they're a little bit more challenging and a little bit more difficult to find sometimes, or to participate in, like today. But I find it quite truly ironic how many times I've seen students or people who are new into the job market, that there's sometimes just a fundamental lack of research in terms of looking into companies and the industries and the things that they can pad their CV with that could help them. And I find that's ironic when you're considering it's a research, it's predominantly researchers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm sure I see Edward nodding as well. I'm talking lofty concepts, but at bare minimum, you should have read up about the company that you're going for an interview for. And we do run into a number of people who haven't. And what's very impressive is if you can network into the company. I will say at STEMCELL that, our scientists are more than happy to have conversations with other scientists about what's great about STEMCELL and what's not great about STEMCELL. And you should, discern your employer to fit with your values, as Judene said. And that, just a quick ping on LinkedIn might result in someone reaching back to you and telling you what it's really like to work there. So I can definitely tell you from an HR perspective, but I'm not a scientist. A scientist will tell you from a scientist's perspective.
Right. And any salesperson will tell you the value of a warm referral, for sure. So before we go to Ed, I've got a question for you, one and possibly a follow-up. Just going to our polls results. So it's interesting. What skills training do you wish you had before launching your career or think you will need? Top one, the most popular one, is leadership skills at 44%, followed by communication and interpersonal skills, which is 28%. And then scientific technical skills, report writing, GLP, et cetera, at 16%, and process improvement methodology at 11%. So Ed, let's get to you. I have a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions from the audience as well. But in terms of some of these things, there are outside organizations that train in things like presentation skills. Even in sales, there's tons of sales training out there. And certainly even in technical skills, GLP, GMPs, there's some things. Do you find it's not limited to the ones that were in our poll, but would you find somebody who had a designation or a recognition, an industry recognition or a course certification or something along those lines in any of these skills, do they go to the top of the pile when you're hiring? How important are those things, and which skills do you see the most or find most valuable in terms of your hiring?
Short answer to that, Rob, is absolutely. When I spoke earlier about translating that scientific knowledge into lab execution, that's sometimes where we see potential for maybe disconnect or a bit of a gap in terms of those essential lab skills. Having the facilitation of that having been attested, measured, and recognized by a third party or some other institution or some other format that they're able to demonstrate that proficiency and that understanding of application in the lab environment, it certainly would give them an advantage. If we look at how that plays into, from an HR process perspective, initial kind of screening of candidates or contact points, that would certainly get them in front of a hiring manager, a hiring team faster than someone who potentially didn't. It can help accelerate, their onboarding, making them more effective, contributing to the work more quickly, and ultimately advancing their careers at a more rapid pace as well, as they could have, stand out amongst their peers as they come into the organization already.
Understood. Okay, great. Specific to you, a question from our audience, Ed, just as a follow-up. How much of a demand at Charles River Labs for HQP training around foundational knowledge on quality management systems and GMP? How much of a demand is there in terms of your CRO-based studies? That's alphabet soup there, but if we can dissect that a little bit. So what kind of demand? It's very specific to Charles River Labs, but that's okay. We want to hear a little bit, we want to know a little bit more about your business. Can you answer that question?
I certainly can to a certain degree anyway. Most of our needs are in the GLP space, so good laboratory practices. Not very different conceptually from GMP or any of the GXPs that are out there. That is probably where we see a lot of tooling up that's needed with our initial staff as they come in, applying their scientific knowledge in a way that follows those good laboratory practices, that ensures the rigor, the repeatability of the work that we do, the quality that it captures, to make sure that it would pass all of the tests that we would want to put it through, should it never need to be revisited by Health Canada or the FDA or any other regulatory body. The understanding of those quality management systems is really essential, and it does touch all of our staff at all levels. Interestingly enough, as the non-scientist in the organization as well at the executive table, the understanding that's required of those GLP principles and our quality management system, as how it plays into our conduct in the lab, repeats on study, deviations to study protocol, what that means in terms of employee performance and retraining and retooling. It all kind of comes back around to how people are equipped to be able to do the work. So it very much does factor into it. When I spoke earlier about kind of continuous improvement, as Helen was mentioning, having that voice, I think the one thing that we're seeing in industry that is maybe generational, but is maybe just evolutionary, is kind of that elimination of hierarchy. So the ability to speak up, to share that diversity of thought, as Helen alluded to, plays into the quality management system, because it will ask the questions of how we can do things better, how we can address, analysis repeats or any corrections to work that we need to redo. So it is incredibly valuable, and it's part of everyone's job in our company for sure.
And you'd think that as a nation of newcomers, nation of immigrants, that we welcome 300,000 of them a year, that we'd get a little bit better at this, because the point is a lot of companies that incorporate newcomers into their hiring strategies, because it's such a strategically valuable labor market. But sometimes these communications challenges of being able to speak up around a board table, right, leading a meeting, there are cultural differences. A lot of people, there are some cultures that have, the cultural learning has been to stifle conversation or to be led as opposed to lead, and some of that, as Helen was talking about, and I love the way you put it, Helen, and the fact that a little bit you're looking at some of these students as a bit of a tabula rasa, where that's a gift. The fact that you don't have to rewire them, that you can infuse them with some of your corporate culture and the way to succeed in these. So Judene, let me ask you, because you mentioned a little bit about agility, specifically about with students, and God knows in the age of COVID, we've all had to become more agile, including the entire industry. But agility is really now a new essential skill. Really, it's a new success skill. Being able to be nimble in the workforce, not only with your career, but within a company, especially if you navigate the hallways of power and the hallways of your own career advancement. So, what is what are institutions like at the University of Waterloo, what are they doing to inject some of these essential skills into their curricula, into the programs that you offer?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think to use a science term, despite the fact that I'm not a scientist, it really is in the DNA of Waterloo, where the model for our school was based on this alternating of students being in an academic setting and then transitioning to being in a setting where they can apply what they're learning, develop new skills, and then that takes them back into the classroom where they now have access to a broader skill base and skill set. And speaking of agility, an appreciation for maybe the difference between those two environments and how things are being learned and taught, potentially more formal in the academic setting and more informal, relying on those networks that Helen and Ed were speaking about. So I think the model supports that idea of technical skills being more incorporated into the curriculum. And I think industry associations like BioTalent can play a really important role for us in being that connection point at a broader level. So not at the student level, but at the institution level between the post-secondary institutions and companies within a specific sector. To both understand the challenges that post-secondaries can hopefully rise to within a sector, but then also for BioTalent to be sharing with companies what they learn is happening in the post-secondary sector. So where they notice that those changes are being made or those responses are being created.
Do you find that there's in the creation of our courses that we've just launched today, we were bringing together academia and employers like Ed and Helen, and what was interesting was the perception. What I found striking was the perceptions, the shocked nature. We had one dean of science of a university I won't mention stated. There were companies, and Ed, you were saying, "Oh my goodness, yeah, we really need GLP," and a lot of the students are they're not coming to us with enough of that, just from a technical acumen. And the dean was going, "Oh my God, if you only knew how much we instill those skills into these kids," and it's very interesting. So the perception is goes to show how much those skills are needed. And that they have to be even more. And I think there's a perception on that, and there's in terms of sometimes, and I'm not going to beat up on universities, colleges tend to, because they're so aligned from the top to the bottom to get the kids into the jobs, that it's sometimes struggling. It's more of a struggle for universities. And I think that's really keenly felt in the bioeconomy because, I mean, let's face it, to be an innovator in bioeconomy, a scientific innovator, you're pretty much going to need a graduate or a postgraduate degree in terms of that. It's one of the most educated verticals in the world, right? It's in terms of that. And as a result, though, that the universities, because of that, it seems that the universities, there's a bit of a rift, right? As much as organizations like the Work Learn Institute in the University of Waterloo is trying to bridge that gulf, a lot of times the academics don't seem to necessarily know what is needed out in the workforce. Why do you think that is, Judene? Let me ask you that. Where do you think that is? Why do you think that rift continues to exist?
It's a good question. I think that it would probably vary by discipline, but I'm not shocked to hear that. I'm obviously not shocked to hear that disconnect exists. I think a couple of one of the interesting things that we've been doing relates to data mining job descriptions, and so that's a really tangible way for us to present back to academic departments to say, it's not just what we're hearing on the street. This is what the students that are in your programs, the jobs that they're doing require. And so it's a different way of us getting the messages into the hands of people who are keenly, particularly in the context of Waterloo, who are keenly interested in ensuring that the students that they have are prepared for those workplaces. The other comment that I would make is I think there's a lot more that can be done at the graduate level across Canada, certainly at Waterloo, with respect to work integrated learning and helping bridge those connections between what they may have pursued as 8 years in post-secondary, and how that translates. And I think there's increasing interest and appetite both amongst graduate supervisors and amongst graduate students themselves, who aren't going to follow necessarily an academic path, and so need to know how to translate the experiences and adapt to a new environment where those are going to be applied. I completely agree with all of the things Helen was saying.
Understood. Okay, great. Well, we've had 45 minutes without dwelling on the C word, COVID. So unfortunately, it's been refreshing, I must say. I think everybody needs a break from that once in a while, but we do have to come back to it because it is affecting our industry. It's affecting the agility that is critical to it. So I want to go to a second polling question, if we can, to our audience. Back to you to respond. Since COVID-19, how has your organization's approach, that would be where you work, to professional development been impacted in terms of the professional development that you have access to, or if you're in HR, that which you've been able to enact within your company? So the 5 options are: you've switched to more online training, that you're still doing in-person training, but in smaller groups, probably virtually, on the job learning on the job learning or in the moment training, limited or that you found more limited capacity in your organization for professional development, or finally, your organization doesn't currently offer training. And as much as that's an unfortunate thing, that's, 80% of the bioeconomy is small and medium-sized enterprises, and nowhere near the size of organizations like STEMCELL Technologies or Charles River Labs. And actually, they don't have access to it. And a lot of these CEOs, as we know, are PhDs sometimes in molecular biology or something, and they don't have any formal training in HR. That's also the thing. They're small business owners, and sometimes they're ill-equipped, right, to be satisfying the training. So this question is quite interesting. But back to COVID-19, Helen, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the impact that COVID-19 has had on STEMCELL Technologies and your onboarding and training processes.
Well, we literally had to, speaking of innovation and also pivoting and being nimble. In STEMCELL's case, we decided on a Friday in March that we were going to move all of our staff to a work from home environment, including those in the labs, for a period of time on a Friday. And we had 23 people starting on Monday in orientation. So I was extremely impressed at our HR and IT folks' ability to shift on a dime. And the following Monday, we ran a virtual orientation for the first time in STEMCELL's history. And the IT department on Monday afternoon managed to get out laptops to all of those 23 people. So some of them on the first day were dialing into our online orientation through their cell phones because they didn't have access to a laptop at home. And they anticipated that, and they sort of morphed the content so that it would be fairly light on the Monday. And since then, we've had to evolve dramatically. Our lab staff and our manufacturing staff, as well as our shipping distribution staff, obviously are back at work now. We've had no choice to sustain our business. We have to do that. And we continue to have to onboard staff. We are hiring again. And after a short period where we stopped hiring while we figured out what the heck was going on, like any other business out there. And so depending on the job that you're in, we've had to shift how we train. So if you're coming into manufacturing, historically, we would have done shoulder-to-shoulder training on each step of our manufacturing process in the clean room. The benefit of our industry is that we do manufacture in clean rooms. So we already have established aseptic techniques. We already have established gowning, masking, etc. protocols. And so to shift that mindset for those individuals who move into the manufacturing environment isn't very difficult. They just have to be careful about how close they're standing with one another. What's interesting is one may think, as we read in the media, that every industry is downsizing. In our industry, or in our business, and maybe it's the same at Charles River, we are having to increase the size of our workforce as a business continuity measure. So we know that we operate, sort of two different shifts. They're on, they have an hour apart. We completely clean down all of the lab surfaces and, common areas as those shifts change. But if one person becomes COVID positive on that shift, potentially the entire shift might have to self-isolate for 14 days. And so we have to have a little bit bigger of a workforce than we normally would to plan for those kinds of business continuity issues. So there is opportunity and hiring happening. And then, like I said, so the onboarding becomes more challenging in the in-person environment. In the vast majority of our staff, we have over 400 staff who are working in the office in labs right now, but that leaves 1,100 who are working from home. And so many of our programs now are shifting virtually. We ourselves are having to learn how to create engaging content. I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little bit tired of, sitting in meetings like this and seeing everybody sitting in their chairs. I was on a call the other day where a guy actually had flip charts and a whiteboard in his office, and it was such a relief to just see someone moving out of their chair. And so we're just thinking about those kinds of things and how we can utilize new technologies to make the online learning experience less two-dimensional.
Fair enough. I'm missing those scientific trade shows where the speaker has 20 minutes but has 58 slides, each one of them with 14 bullet points in 10-point font.
And then you can go talk to him at a postering session after the fact, right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's so funny. That's right. So let's go to our survey results for the polling question number 2. I'm going to send these results to the audience. So certainly not surprisingly, the switch to more online training is our most popular trend, with 64% of respondents stating that that's what they have seen in their own company, followed by a limited capacity for professional development. So that would say little or no or decreased training. And I think that's very interesting because on a best practices front, certainly from an HR, and it's really encouraging to hear you that say from your perspective, Helen, that stem cell technology is actually having to scale up in terms of hiring and everything. That this is the time that a lot of scientific companies could take carpe diem in terms of being able to invest in professional development and do some leadership on this level. I know sometimes it's a question of capital. It's a question of some of these things are pricey, but you've got a captive audience that are waiting to be shown that they're being invested in. And certainly, I think for a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, as the economy rebounds, retention is going to be an issue for some of our people. So it is something about that. There is something to be said about that some of these programs are readily available, and now's the time. Judene, maybe we could talk about you a little bit on the flip side. How are your students coping with this? I mean, is there a reduced sense of opportunity for these learning experiences or the work-integrated learning that Waterloo is seeing?
Yeah, the timing was interesting with March being when everything made a pretty dramatic shift in that our terms work such that students are out between January and April, and and employers are recruiting for the next batch of students in typically February, early March. And so in some ways that timing worked well in that students who were employed during January to April term made the switch the way that everybody else within their organization was making the switch. So they had been onboarded in person. They'd gotten into whatever the work was that they were going to be doing. We did some research with that group and found that 87% of them reported that they felt the transition went well. So thank you to all of our employer partners who helped make that smooth for them. But it also gave us the opportunity to have them tell us about what the differences were that they noticed. And so a couple of things that came to mind was the importance of self-direction. So when they were working from home, working remotely, the need for them to take initiative, to reach out into others in the group to say, hey, I could do more, or can I help with this, or can I chat with you about what it is that you do? So those were some of the things that came up. The other thing that came up in the research was that informal communication was an area that they felt suffered. So to Helen's point about not being around a whiteboard and some flip charts, they really felt that they were still connecting it to the same degree related to specific projects or weekly team meetings. But when it came to someone coming to check in and see how they were, popping by their desk to see how they were doing, or eating lunch with people, or being exposed to things that someone might say, oh, you should come along with us to this meeting. So I think that's an area that will continue to work with students to help them position themselves to be successful in this environment. At an operational level, obviously co-op, the operation of co-op changed. 70% of our employers continued hiring. We had 5,000 students employed in work terms in the spring terms, more than 5,000 in the fall term. But obviously that's down from what we typically are doing. So we've had to be more agile and nimble and create different flexible pathways for students. So piecing together multiple roles or less than 12 weeks in length. And on our employer side, creating different hiring schedules. So not everything is focused in one main round, but sort of stretching that over the course of the term to meet their needs and to recognize that they may not know 4 months in advance what students or what projects they're going to need help with. So that's sort of
right.
what the change has meant for us.
Understood. And Ed, how about you? How has this changed how you onboard or how your training habits? We saw the survey where people have seen some trends, obviously, to more online, but some people have seen a reduction in unfortunately, in professional development and in training. What have you guys done or incorporated into your machinations to cope with the current environment?
We were fortunate that over the last probably 2 years, we had developed a global onboarding strategy for new employees that was already a little bit more technology leveraged, a bit more interactive to allow people to get a bit of a head start before they walked in the door on day one. So what we did is we pivoted to leverage that in different ways, build on that. Some of the components that were done in person, we laid out onto that platform with a lot of success. But at the same time, nothing replaces, shoulder to shoulder collision opportunities or collision events, which is my takeaway expression for today. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It really, we've had to be more flexible in all of the situations going on. Our employees that have kids in school, young children in daycares, potentially in the early days where we were dealing with all the school closures, that's affecting new employees who maybe had accepted a job to start and then in between that period found out that their child is now home and they were set to come in the following Monday, etc. So we need to be more flexible with our candidates, with our new employees that are starting in the same way that we are with our employees who are having to maybe call out to attend to that, maybe have been potentially exposed and are self-isolating as a preventative measure. So we've had to kind of incorporate all of those variables. It's resulted in having to supplement our workforce that was already in a stage of organic growth. So it's where we were looking to add X number of people to our team, we've now had to X plus 5 to allow for some of this capacity. It's been fun in many ways because it has humanized a lot of our leadership, a lot of our talent. And has allowed us to be much more flexible with everyone and appreciative of what everyone is facing that we know about and sometimes that we don't. So I think it's helped bring that to the forefront. It's brought diversity to the forefront in the same way. And so I think if anything, it's advanced the organization, right? A crisis is an opportunity. You hate to say it with what we're going through, but if you don't seize the learnings and the adaptations out of it, then you've missed a chance. So I think we've done our best to take away whatever positives we can from the situation and hopefully deliver that back to our employees and our prospective candidates as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if there's one story about the bioeconomy, not just in Canada but worldwide, is that you have to take a crisis and it has to pick it up to pieces and turn it into opportunity. I'd like to seize that a little bit. Helen, you touched on a couple of points there a while ago, but was there something unique that you've learned through all of this, or that STEMCELL Technologies is going to incorporate into its hiring practices or its talent challenges going forward as a result of the current situation?
Well, I'll certainly echo Edward's comments about the humanity of and the diversity of human experience. We've all been instructed very clearly in this call to, dress appropriately for a conference, have a nice looking background. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, Edward, when I say that you went into the office specifically for this event so that you would have all of those things in place. But normally you might see my husband coming and going behind me, and my child who's 18 coming home from work, and things like that. And it's quite lovely, and also a big responsibility, I think, to have access to people's homes in this way. And for the employer. And we personally, I also have great empathy for some of our younger staff. We're based in Vancouver. Their cost of real estate is enormous, and they may be working from home in an environment where there's another person, or, we've got one staff member in Germany who is in a house with 5 other people, and we have to be flexible with them about how and where they work. The question of staff who have children, we've had to be extremely compassionate towards that, particularly as schools go back and we see more COVID cases in schools. It's a tremendous strain. And so we're quite focused on mental health of our staff. And we definitely had care for the whole human before COVID, but this has given us on the HR side permission to run deep programming around mental health, which I think is much needed in the scientific community in general. As someone who was new to the industry 5 years ago, I saw all these type A, really smart people who had never been taught how to set boundaries for themselves and work reasonable hours and sleep and eat on a regular schedule and things like that. So to be able to jump off of this crisis and offer really formal programming in our organization about how to ensure that you're well physically and mentally has been tremendous. So I'll leave it at that and pass it on to someone else.
Okay. So I'd like to go to our poll, last polling question before, because I think it's a good segue in terms of the professional development that people have received. So our third polling question is, what does professional development mean to you? And by you, I mean our audience. So the 5 options: A, career advancement within an organization. B, career transition, in other words, changing careers. Personal interest, appeals to your own personal interest. Or D, a job requirement, that professional development is usually something that is obligatory. Or E, unsure, or none of the above. So I'll ask everybody to answer that. In the meantime, how do you think, in work integrated learning, Judene, do you find training courses, let me put it this way, is there an optimal time to hit new recruits? Is it best when to wait until they're onboarding because they're in the career mode? Do students take professional development training seriously when they don't have a job, or before they've required? Where, as I mentioned before, there are sometimes I meet a lot of students that don't apply research skills to their own career, their own job search, and it happens a lot. I'm not trying to beat anybody up, but it does happen a great deal. And getting your first job is like running away from a bear. You don't have to be the fastest person in the world. You just have to be faster than the person next to you. So what have you found in terms of the training courses? When's the best time to catch them?
It's a great question, and I think students who are participating in co-op or work integrated learning programs are often doing it because they want to see the connection between the discipline that they're interested in and what that might look like in terms of a job. And so I think some will be motivated to do that training or professional development in advance of getting a job. I think others it will become much more meaningful to them once they see the practice of it and how it can advance them. So I would say for most students, they probably, for some, they'll be the eager ones, and they'll be doing the self-research or the research into a particular industry and wanting to position themselves competitively. And for others, the training will become more meaningful once they've seen it in action. The other thing that I would say is that I think the provision of professional development for WIL students speaks to the industry and organizations as a whole. So we did research that looked at what influenced students' intentions to return, and whether they felt that they had the opportunity to learn and grow was a significant contributor. And so it's also a signal of potential within an industry where WIL students say, hey, this is an organization or an industry that's going to take care of me. They're going to provide me with these kinds of opportunities.
Okay, perfect. We've got some results from our polling, and I'm going to be sending them to the audience. So what does professional development mean to you? 46% responded that it would be career advancement within an organization, which I think would probably be logical that most people associate it with that. And then about the equal numbers say career transition and personal interest, which is interesting because I think it's also quite true that professional development has to have a measure of flexibility. We were talking earlier about essential skills. Essential skills are critical in any industry vertical, and are going to be critical to any career transition, especially one that involves going into a different industry than the biotech industry. But I think also personal interest, and I think that's the other thing too, is that I think sometimes companies have to sell it a little bit. Ed, over to you. Like, in terms of, we mentioned earlier that you said that people who have some kind of a designation would go to the top of that job application pile if they had. But how do you guys treat your own training? Is it something that you make obligatory? Is it a buy-in? Is it that you only give to your superstars because you see these ones rising to the cream of the crop here, or what? How does Charles River deal with that?
So we've got our kind of fundamentals that everyone needs, and that are kind of obligatory, that are tracked from a regulatory perspective. So if you are going to perform a certain assay and it's going to meet GLP requirements, we need to demonstrate that you have been trained and signed off to be able to do so. On top of that, then, in terms of further kind of professional or personal development, that we've been getting more creative with. So we've facilitated some third-party programs. We've built some in-house capacity, some co-development forums to allow people to come together and have shared learnings and learn from each other's experiences hands-on as we've applied those learnings in our environment. And then we've also had to pivot a little bit to a little bit more self-directed development, where people can not have it delivered to them, but can go and seek it out. We've leveraged things like LinkedIn Learning, which goes beyond kind of the professional development piece, and in granting access and delivering that to our population, people can also go and take photography courses. So, we are really looking at kind of the holistic human development piece, more generally than those fundamentals. Leadership is working its way into it in so many different ways, because I guess we're seeing work move away from the traditional definition of leader as manager, and that people are leaders in so many different ways inside an organization right now. As an individual contributor, you could be one of the most significant leaders at a site or in a department, just in terms of the way you drive thought, you drive advancement, you drive innovation. There's so many ways to define that. So we've had to find the right ways to sprinkle that in to almost everything. And hopefully that meets the needs of the continued growth for our people and for the organization.
That's great. I think the takeaway, besides collision event, which is a good one, that's a keeper. I think that the idea that when you said it's more human, the industry has become more human and more realized that the holistic approach to, I think, even professional development, that's happened too. Unfortunately, my distinguished panelists, we've come to the end of our session. As thought-provoking as it has been, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Judene Pretti from the University of Waterloo, Edward Short from Charles River Laboratories, and Helen Sheridan from STEMCELL Technologies. Do any of you have any final thoughts before we leave to impart to our audience in terms of things that they should keep in mind as they continue their job search? Very quickly, like 10 or 15 seconds. Helen, anything to add?
I would just say I love the other takeaway of job search is like running from a bear. But I would say that as different from running from a bear, even if you don't succeed on the first try again. Indeed.
Excellent. Ed, any final thoughts?
Just explore different avenues that maybe are not in the traditional space. We've always had to compete against people seeing large pharma as, in Quebec as a key landing spot, contract research or, even contract manufacturing or other research and life sciences, other aspects of the bioeconomy that continue to emerge. Just keep thinking outside the box.
Great. Judene?
The value of these kinds of opportunities to connect with an industry association, with those working in industry and academia. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank all three of you for coming to this great session. I want to thank the STEMCELL Network for providing the forum. My name is Rob Henderson from BioTalent Canada. I hope you've all enjoyed the session. There will be questions still continuing to be answered after the session ends, but for now, enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks. Have a great day. And I appreciate all your participation and questions. Bye now.